Welcome to the Deal by Me podcast, where we ask guests to tell us your story and we put the spotlight on you. Hello there, this is Dr. James W. Smith, your host. We transform lives by encouraging and inspiring. Someone encouraged and inspired this host, a former lawyer, gambler, inmate, and his life was transformed. The same can happen to you. You can support our podcast with a monthly recurring amount for as little as $3. Check out my website and see what I offer that can be encouraging, inspiring, and transforming for you. I'm available for speaking engagements, in person, and virtual seminars. So please contact me through my website, www.dealbyme.com. I have with me Susan Gold, who is keen on leaving a legacy to help others heal from challenges she has successfully met. Toxic family, transforming childhood trauma into adult freedom is part of that quest. With the same magic Susan created in her entertainment career, she is now leading retreats, webinars, workshops, and private sessions to help others drop outdated storylines and programming in exchange for living from the heart and authentic freedom as adults. What an awesome and powerful story she has. So I am excited to have her come and be a part of our podcast today. We are so thrilled to have Susan. Susan, welcome again to this podcast. And I want to, first of all, ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and where you've been interviewed from.
Dr. Smith, I'm coming to you from rural Northwest Montana. I think I'm a 4-mile walk to the Canadian border, but I came here via Los Angeles, and previous to that, I was living in New York City. And I have to say, I was happy in both those metropolitan, expansive cities, but I'm certainly in rural bliss now.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I have looked at and have read your profile, and I know that you've also checked a little bit about my podcast. I saw where you had listened to one of my podcasts with Sarah which was an awesome guest, also, as I know you're going to be today. Uh, so I want to get into uh, your your story. I know you've had an interesting background as a child. Even your book talks about that. Toxic family, transforming childhood trauma into adult freedom. And so I want to first of all kind of ask you to describe for listeners of this podcast a moment when you allow your intuition to lead you, because as a young person it seems like you have done quite a bit. You move, you've been to New York. As a matter of fact, I think I saw where you left home as soon as you graduated from high school, and you've now moved to California from New York. So you've been around. So obviously something within you made you do this. Talk about that a little bit for us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith. And I really appreciate you asking, because an intuitive told me I had 3 books to write, not just one. And I'm
Okay.
contemplating what that topic is going to be on book 2. And I've been encouraged that maybe it will be about intuition. I have been led. I feel that I came in to this planet, to Earth, to this earthly walk,
Mhm.
to experience some hardships and to be able to evolve and show others how those hardships have turned into actual benefits, gold, if you like. But I was intuitive from a very early age, and highly empathic and also telepathic. And I believe that it kept me safe in a very chaotic environment. I don't have blame for my family members, but it was hurt and abused children raising hurt and abused children. And it goes way back in the family line. I was the middle child of five, and my father is a genius. He's an astrophysicist, but he had a little issue with alcohol and womanizing and narcissism. And my mother had five children before she was 30 years old, never had her chance at a formal education after nurturing my father through a master's and then a PhD. She had five children to contend with, and she soothed through food. And when you were an overeater and you had a food addiction back then, they treated you with diet pills, and diet pills were actually speed. So I was in a home with an alcoholic and a speed freak, and I believe they were both actually suffering with mental illness as well. And I knew very young that it was not a safe environment and that I needed to stay focused on the day that I would escape.
Hmm. Or are talking about problems that you had in family life. The alcoholism. Father was narcissistic. Well, I'm not pronouncing it correctly. I always get tongue tied when I say that. But anyway, uh, what? Uh, let me ask you this way: what what is it about that kind of experience uh, that you would say impacted your life? Was it, or which one was the greatest? Was it the alcoholism? Was it his personality? Was it something else?
I think it was a divine cocktail, especially when
Okay.
you consider both parents together with what they were struggling with.
Hmm.
But what I garnered pluses and what some would perceive as minuses. I had very low self esteem. I had very little self worth. I was measuring myself to what I perceived you wanted from me in order to find some semblance of safety. And that's carried on deep into my adulthood. My platform in the home that I grew up in was always shifting. There was nothing that was truly stable. The rules shifted when there were rules. And I believe that doesn't really set us up for success. But I also learned how to be independent at a very young age. I also learned how to do things that most children might not have been faced with at the time, to take on difficult tasks and complete them unassisted. But that also translated into not asking for help when I truly needed it.
Hmm. Very, very interesting. Your life is uh, interesting, compelling, and very uh, exciting in a way because of what you have done. And so, just interviewing you is something that's touching to me because I've had that kind of experience, not as a child. I grew up in a really good environment, but after becoming an adult and practicing law, then I got into some other stuff that took me to the bottom, and finally I got a hold of myself and rose again. So I know and have a feel for your journey, but there are some things that I am interested in knowing a little bit more about you because I know from reading your profile that you also uh, is an athlete, uh, and you and I need to know how has your experience as an endurance athlete impacted your life.
Well, first, I want to say that it was in a positive way, but I took it to that invisible line where it actually became another detriment. I started marathoning. I started running in college. I was always active. I was dancing when I was 3 years old. And I started running in college, and that translated into marathoning in New York City. I was really into the New York Road Runners Club and did the New York City Marathon as soon as possible. And then I was experiencing too many injuries with running and running that kind of distance. So here's the interesting thought. I thought I'll spread it out over 3 sports: swim, bike, run, and maybe I won't have as many injuries from just the focus on running. And that's an interesting twist in the mental thinking. So I began triathloning. I loved it. I took to it like a duck to water. I thought I would do it for life. It also caught up with me. I mean, training 3 sports in a week, and then I would do hot yoga as well on top of it. I would walk the dog. It was obsessive and excessive. And ultimately, I had to stop the triathloning too. So then I put the focus on masters swimming. And within 4 years, even though I wasn't a swimmer as a kid, I had a national ranking because I just went gung ho with the focus and was bludgeoning my body. I was up early, 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. to prep to jump in the water at 5:30 a.m. And yes, I lived in sunny Southern California, but at 5:30 a.m. at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, it can be 38 degrees on deck and the water's 76. And it's not for the faint of heart. And I was throwing kettlebells, and I was still in hot yoga, and I was still walking that dog 3 times a day, plus caring for my son as a single mom. And I had to look at my behavior. I was again creating a false persona where I could gather some kind of self esteem, even in something that seems like it would be healthy. It was an addiction nonetheless, with some tentacles that I needed to tease out to find genuine compassion. And that persona fell as well. I went from all that to not being able to walk around my block and in chronic pain for almost 2 years, which led me on a whole different journey, Dr. Smith.
Well, very very interesting. You know, when you go through the path that you've taken, obviously it takes prayer, meditation, takes a lot of will. And so, could you kind of share with listeners of this podcast uh, when all of this began to take place within you, how you began to meditate, and what was it like for you to kind of move yourself from one point to another?
I was in my early 20s when I saw those red flags come up. I was duplicating behavior that I saw demonstrated in my family home. I was in an abusive relationship that was very dramatic and very argumentative, very abusive. My friends were becoming more fair weather. I was using alcohol to placate feelings and to soften emotions. And luckily, I saw the signs and did get help and did get the right help. And I ended up getting sober in my early 20s. And I've been sober, clean and sober for decades now. And that was step one for me
Mhm.
to create a clean, level slate. That taught me tools that I had not learned for a living. It taught me how to create a stable support system. And then that led me to a clearer learning and yearning for spirituality. I think I always had it. I had it as a young child. I had it as a teenager. I had it in my early 20s when I was drinking, trying to find it through
Mhm.
various substances. And ultimately, um, prayer, meditation, I mean, formal meditation, half day silent meditation retreats led to week long silent meditation retreats and formal sitting on the cushion. And then ultimately, what I learned was for me, I could meditate just looking at a flower, or taking a walk, or focusing on the black line at the bottom of the pool, or feeling the
Mm.
cadence on the bicycle. So it really translated from something formalized, structured, I'd say tended more towards the rigid, to something more free and spirit soothing.
I've never really gotten into meditation, but I've interviewed quite a few people who have done that, and it seems to have led them into another realm for the life. And so I guess uh, I'm just curious when you are doing it. Uh, did it kind of get you into another mental uh, framework that you can kind of see where you wanted to go and how you wanted to get there? Is that something that meditation helped you with?
So I came off a week long silent meditation retreat where we held complete silence, even no eye contact with the
Okay.
fellow meditators. And I was so clear
Mm.
at the end of that week. I went to the grocery store to get some groceries on the way home from this retreat, and I could clearly hear what the checker was thinking inside her mind. It took me right back to childhood with that, when I had that kind of clarity. And it also helped me really get in tune with that intuitive voice. What it does for me is take me off that hamster wheel that I tend to run, where my central nervous system is so mangled by what I perceive, what I hear, what I feel, just being a human being on this great, ebullient, but crazy planet. And it helps me come back and center. I mean, in my book, there are exercises in the appendix. It's a workbook that helped me through my experiences. And there's a lot of simple tools. We'll just do
Okay.
one right now where, one is where you just take a deep breath in
Okay. Mm.
and then take a hand, right or left, doesn't matter. Put it on your solar plexus, which is right up at the top of your rib cage below your heart. And either silently to yourself or out loud,
Mm.
say, I'm okay.
I got you. I hear you. Well said. Well said. Uh, my podcast, Susan, is about encouraging, inspiring, and transforming. And that's what this is really what makes my interview with you so touching, because you're right in line with what I really try to share with listeners of this podcast. I was a pastor for uh, 33 years, short of 2 months, would have been 33 years at the same church. And I wanted to continue my ministry with uh, doing this podcast of encouraging, inspiring, and transforming. And there's something that's you've been talking about, the trauma and whatever that you went through as a child uh, growing up. And so, how do you create, you know, transformation from trauma? Because there are a lot of people who are listening to uh, this podcast who are into some of the same things that you went through, and you obviously have moved beyond it now, and in so many ways. So, how do you? What would you say to these individuals?
Well, the very first thing is I had to become aware of it. I mean, I think trauma today is a bit of a buzzword, but I'm grateful that it's come forward on the platform because it's a natural
Hmm.
liaison, or it's a natural state of being on this planet just by what we're faced with now at this point in time. So I had to be aware that there was trauma. I had to accept, yes, there was trauma, there were traumatic experiences, and for me they were still locked in pockets of my body. So while it was important to get the narrative down with talk, it was also as important to do the somatic work. So really go into my body and explore those pockets of trauma and allow them air to breathe and to dissipate. So really, to take action, there's a couple of steps before that. And it's helpful if you can have someone lead you through it. It's pretty tough to get through on your own. And if you're willing to be humble and ask for help or find help, and there's never been a better time with all the digital options that we have available and all the awakening
Mm.
that's happening to our human collective, with more and more people coming to understand their own trauma and their own traumatic experiences and then working through it with various different modalities. There's a lot of help, and it's much more acceptable now than even 2 decades ago.
Mm. Oh, well said. Well said. Interesting. Well put. And I know listeners of this podcast uh, are going to take it in. Uh, Please don't go anywhere, listeners, because Susan is going to come back and share a few more good information with us. I call them those tidbits. So, but first of all, I want to ask Susan if someone is interested in your book or learning more about you or what you do that can help them. Could you tell us a little bit more how they can find you or contact you and just, you know, this information that would be helpful to them?
Yeah, only if you feel moved, go to susangold.us and it's all
Okay.
there.
SusanGold.us. All right. Listeners, you hear that? SusanGold.us. You can get it. You can get it. Susan, um, you have shared so much. Uh, would you just tell us or describe a moment of truth you've experienced in life? You've been through all this, and we want to get as much from you as we can today. Just describe a moment of truth you have experienced in life that will help somebody who may be listening today.
Sure. I'm happy to. There's been so many, but I'll pick one that was very pivotal. It was like perfect storm. I knew my marriage was well past its expiration date. I
Mm-hmm.
knew it in my heart. I knew it in every tentacle of my body, but I didn't want to surrender. I wanted my marriage to work. I had a son with my husband, and I did everything I could. But ultimately, that voice was quite loud. We were in mediation. We got to the last point. I thought my marriage was going to be saved, and my husband's eyes went in those cold, dark, lizard like slits. He crossed his arms and said, "I'm hiring an attorney and I'm filing for divorce."
Mm.
And that voice, clear as a bell, said to me, "This is the universe doing for you what
Mm.
you cannot do for yourself."
Mm.
And that was the truth.
Wow. Wow. Um, you. I don't know what to say, Susan. You're so expressive with it, and I feel it, and I know listeners of this podcast can feel it as they listen to you share. Would you You talked about also your the addiction of your father specifically, uh, and so would you say to, or what would you say to someone who knows they have an issue with addiction and they want to get clean? You know, and I know there are people who will listen to this podcast who are going through some addiction in their life. I was a compulsive gambler. Well, I thought I was a compulsive gambler. I learned later that I was just had a I was just afraid to fail. But I did go through this, uh, and I'm certain there are people who are listening, maybe have an addiction to gambling, to alcohol, or to anything else. Addiction is not confined to just two things. What would you say to them?
Love yourself. You're not a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
You have an issue to focus on, to look at, to move through, and to triumph over, to learn from. It's an opportunity for you to take your life to a place beyond your wildest dreams.
Hmm.
If you can just hold on for the miracle and become willing to surrender one day at a time. That's all, one day at a time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you you're gonna make me cry. And so male's not supposed to cry, but I don't mind doing it. I've learned that it's a good therapy. But you are sharing such powerful information. What is one spiritual truth you've had thrust upon you? Could you just share that with us?
Yeah, the listeners and you, Dr. Smith, may not appreciate this, but do you know that spiritual axiom, point one finger out and three fingers come back at you?
Mm-hmm.
And I used that for a long time, but I think I mentioned earlier, I'm an empath. That means that I take on the emotions of others. I feel to the core of my being, and then I want to carry their problems. And that's at the detriment to myself. So that axiom, that spiritual truth, is one I have to be seriously careful about. I do reflect,
Mm-hmm.
I do take inventory, but I have to be careful that I'm not doing damage to my own heart with that three fingers point back. It kept me in abusive relationships much longer than I ever had purpose of being in them.
Ooh, mm. Well, as I get ready to bring this to a close, Susan, I can't just close without just sharing. I ask you to talk a little bit about something that's of interest to me. I love. I'm a minister, still doing some preaching and sharing, but I'm also a political kind of junkie. And I was looking at your profile and note that you uh, uh, had mentioned Donnie Dutch. And I see him quite a bit on MSNBC talking, and you talk about Roger Ailes and other people, uh, Taylor Swift. Could you just kind of briefly, I know listeners might be interested. Tell us a little bit about you working with these individuals and how you got into it and what have you. And we'll bring this to a close, but we'll just, and make it as brief as you possibly can.
I always had a dream as a child growing up, watching Barbara Walters on my beanbag chair in my belly in my basement. I wanted to go to New York City and I wanted to be like her. I wanted to work with celebrities. I ended up being her exercise trainer, and she actually stood up for me when I was being sexually harassed in the workplace. That led me to open my own talent brokerage firm. Donnie Deutsch came to me, asked me if I could get Andy Warhol for a client of his, which I did by knocking on the door of the factory and convincing Andy. That just set my career off. And I worked with a lot of household names throughout my career, and I've been really privileged to do so.
Wow. Susan, it has been a real joy to have you come and share with listeners of this podcast today with such compelling and powerful information. And I'm certain that listeners will be thrilled to hear your story. And so I want to say to you again, thank you. Thank you so very much. And to listeners of this podcast, check her out. Get the book. Go to the website, uh, susangold.us, and get as much information as you can. And I know you will be blessed. Again, Susan, thank you. Thank you. And until next time, peace and blessings to each of you.